We're at a pivotal moment of an unprecedented climate crisis. Global temperatures have been on the rise since the Industrial Revolution, and the latest reports from scientists across the globe confirm this is driven by greenhouse gases produced by human activity. This has already prompted warming of 1.1 degrees above pre-industrial levels, resulting in record-breaking hurricanes, wildfires, extreme floods and droughts, receding coastlines from rising sea levels, changing seasonal climate, and ocean acidification. We are on track for temperatures to exceed 3 degrees by 2100, leading to catastrophic consequences to natural ecosystems, our infrastructure, and billions of livelihoods across the world. In response to this major threat, national governments came together around the Paris Agreement in 2015, which pledged to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees and to strive for a 1.5 degree target by 2100. There are many routes to limit to 1.5 degrees, and all imply a radical transformation of our current socioeconomic systems. Getting there would require decarbonizing energy production, unlocking resource and energy efficiencies in agriculture and manufacturing, radically changing consumption habits, and accelerating the development and commercialization of carbon removal technologies. This will not happen on its own, nor will it be easy. Governments will need to enact regulations to drastically increase the cost of carbon. From building innovative products and business models to re-engineering value chains, businesses will need to transition to serve climate-conscious customers and deploy carbon removals at scale. But this transformation will also unlock opportunities to access new markets and to develop innovative products. Delivering a 1.5 degree world could become a major engine of business growth for those that see its potential and seize it. The task at hand is an urgent one. If we don't take action now, we're due to sail past the 1.5 degree mark by 2040. Now's the time to reset our north and deliver a net zero future.
Hello and welcome to Day 4 of COP26 and to our session in which we will examine how businesses, banking and the wider investor community will respond to the challenges and opportunities of securing timely and trusted data in order to drive sustainable performance. I'm Amber Shannon and I lead our sustainability measurement practice. On the opening day of COP, we heard remarks such as the doomsday clock that's relentlessly ticking down. We also had a request for statesmanship and the need to move to a warlike footing. But we also heard from Sir David Attenborough that when we work together and we collaborate, we have the human ingenuity to succeed in this endeavour. These remarks are surely going to add even more pressure on business to play a leading role as we look to solve some of the world's biggest problems. Business leaders now must find how to deliver financial value, but also a more sustainable and just world. And there's reason to be positive. The science, the data, the economics all support the view that when business bridge financial value with sustainability and technology, business performance is enhanced and rewarded accordingly by the markets. We also welcome last night's announcement by the IFRS Foundation, which is a major step forward in terms of collapsing and consolidating the frameworks, the metrics, and even the standard-setting bodies themselves. Trust and credibility is now fundamental. Investors and society at large require high-quality, transparent, and globally comparable sustainability data, and it has to be compatible with their financial disclosures. It's against this backdrop that I'm delighted to be joined by such a wonderful audience and panel in order to understand how their organisations and industries are adapting and looking to solve and harness the data challenge, not only to address credibility problems, but also to really set how the pace and the direction of their organisations as we move from commitment to action. I'll now hand over to my co-host Nina, who will introduce the panel and kick off the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambrose. My name is Nina Jais. I lead our sustainability strategy practice, particularly in the area of sustainable finance. And it's indeed important to have financial services actors in the room when we discuss ESG data and decisioning, because as we just heard also yesterday in the Finance Day of the COP, 130 trillion of assets are now available to finance our transition to a greener economy. So I couldn't be more delighted to have this panel with us today that really spans both the financial services actors, the market players, also enablers, and our industry. So I'll go around and introduce everyone. So first we have Ben Story here from Rolls-Royce, the Chief Strategy Officer there. We have Marcelo Behar, Vice President, Sustainability and Group Affairs of Natura. We have Sana Thiamaya from the Reckitt Benckiser, the Head of Sustainable Brands and Consumer Partnerships there. Celine Hawaya, Group Chief Sustainability Officer of HSBC. We have Richard Matheson, the President of S&P's Global Sustainable One business. And we have Julia Hoggett, the CEO of the London Stock Exchange. It's delightful to have all of you. So thank you so much for joining us. And without further ado, I'll hand it over on our first question, first to Ben. And I'd like to see what is the core of your ESG agendas in each of your organizations. So really the key industry transition that you are now driving for a better future, and how is this creating value both for your company as well as for society and planet?
Thank you. At Rolls-Royce, we're all about innovation. So we love transitions as an organization, and we've been through many transitions throughout our history, going from car engines to aero engines, going from turboprops to gas turbines, going from runways to vertical takeoff and landing, going from subsonic to supersonic, going from, crucially, 4 engines to 2 engines on large aircraft, and now, of course, going from kerosene to electricity. So transitions are kind of part of what Rolls-Royce does, and we've lived through and pioneered many of those through our history. Our purpose as an organization is to pioneer the power that matters. And today, the power that matters overwhelmingly to our customers, to our communities, to society at large, is sustainable power. So in actual fact, it's quite simple for us. As a pioneer, our vision as an organization is to lead the transition to net zero. So for us as an organization, currently today, in a fossil fuel power world, we have 0.25% market share globally. Now, with this transition, we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to grow our market share as a disruptor and to have a massive impact at the same time.
Fantastic. And I think you also said the sustainability is one of the things that is now also ruffling the market a bit. And there's an opportunity just in that to be capturing this. So in terms of the value also for the company. I think that's also very important. It's an important moment also for companies right now to capture the value in leading in it. So Marcelo, if I can get to you next from a different industry perspective, of course.
Thank you so much, and thanks for my colleagues today and for everyone and for the opportunity to talk to you about what we're doing for this transition. So my name is Marcelo Behar, and I am the Vice President for Natura, which is Natura & Co., a group of companies that was born in Brazil 50 years ago, operates in the Amazon region for the last 20 years with over 30 communities. Natura has been on the sustainability space for many decades. Probably it was one of the first companies in the Global South to become carbon neutral back in 2007. So its inventory was made in 2005. And since then, Natura acquired other brands that are well known here, such as The Body Shop, Aesop, and Avon. And together we are the 4th biggest cosmetic group globally. What we see in a transition mode for the next 10 years is how we are going to shift our business to help our main target, which is not only becoming net zero, but connecting carbon metrics with nature and with the Amazon. So that's where we operate, that's where our basis of operation is, and we are committed not only to become net zero by 2030, so 20 years ahead of the UN pledge, but also to fight and to foster collective efforts towards zero deforestation on the Amazon by 2025. So this is super important for us. We are assembling many other companies that are operating with nature-based solutions. So the discussion that we are having here now at COP creates value not only to the companies, but also to those who want to operate with nature-based solutions and who want to build those solutions as carbon removals as well. So this is a super important discussion because, as we all know, there is no Paris Agreement without the tropical forests, and there are no tropical forests without the targets that we all must achieve together. So I think this is super important, and we've seen some results for the company as well, not only for the markets where we operate, but connecting our goals to financials. So we issue a sustainability-linked bond this year, but we are also connecting the targets for our executives and compensations to sustainability. So it's really walking the talk and trying to drive change. So this is how we are trying to build a transition.
Thank you. And you even said that your bond is performance-based, right?
Yes,
on ESG
that's correct.
targets. So that, I think, is the next level also of commitment, but of course also finding the value then from potentially more interest in exactly this type of structure. So thank you so much. Sonia, would you add to this?
Very happy to. For those of you not so familiar with Reckitt, we're a global consumer goods company. We're in 60 countries, 43,000 people globally. But what we're best known for is some of our really loved and trusted brands across the hygiene, health, and nutrition spectrum. Many of you will have it in your homes, in your kitchen, in your bathroom, in your bedroom. Brands such as Finish, Vanish, Harpic, Dettol, which many of you will have seen across the blue and green zone in its multitude, Lysol in the US, and Enfamil. And for us, globally, we sell 20 million products a day. We're in 1 billion homes in aggregate across our brands. And that's a huge privilege. And with that privilege comes a responsibility to use our voice and our presence to really drive and amplify both social and environmental impact in a way that drives growth for us as a business. So our top line is about sustainable outperformance. It's absolutely about doing it both through the breadth of our company and through the power of our brands. Now, there's a lot of talk about purpose-led brands. Everyone's talking about it. But for us, we really wanted to make it tangible and real in a way that links to what that brand does, what that product does, but also really think about that connection. So all of our brands have selected one SDG, one sustainable development goal. We looked at the best to-do list in the world and said every brand pick one where we think we can make the most meaningful contribution. And then everything that brand does, from innovation to how we talk to our consumers to raise awareness of the issues that we care about, to how we partner with people to deliver at scale. That one SDG and that cause and fight drives everything we do. So if you take a brand like Vanish, many of you will know it as a brand that removes stains. I love it as a mother of 2 children. It's an essential. But we're on a mission to do a lot more. If you look at the fashion sector, it contributes 4% to global greenhouse gas emissions. That's more than maritime and aviation combined on an annual basis. So we want to drive a lot more circular practices. We want to inspire behavior change in terms of how people buy, wear, care for, and then pass on their clothes. And the impact that can have on the carbon emissions, on the 350,000 tons of waste, of clothing waste that goes to landfill every year in the UK. What we can do by using our voice and through our product is absolutely going to drive that social and environmental change at scale. So that's one example. If you think about all the brands and what we can do, and if we look at it not just as a way of driving social and environmental impact, but we see it as a commercial play as well. How do we use it to drive penetration, our brand equity? And doing those things in concert will help us deliver what we want to do in terms of sustainable outperformance.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think this is absolutely important. And this key performance indicator of saying also sustainable brands outgrow the normal brands is an important one to watch. Also, of course, then for the financial services arena. So I think we'll now turning this over to our financial services actors and market players there. And first, I'd like to hand it over to you, to Celine, because I do think we'll see already in the comments that we made that banks can be as the leaders also, or companions of companies, of course, in this transition. So you have aligned your goals with the provision of finance to the goals of the Paris Agreement, have set an ambitious net zero target to move all your financed emissions, so the investments and the lending to these companies, to net zero by latest 2050. So I'd love to hear just more about that strategy and the near-term goals on it.
Sure. I think we all know finance is what shapes the future. Where funding goes is where the future goes. I won't explain what HSBC is, because I'm sure all of you know, but we have a $3 trillion balance sheet. We've been around for 150 plus years, and we're east to west. And that's really important because we serve markets across emerging economies. And if we look ahead to the next 3 decades, we have actually 90% of business as usual emissions growth coming from emerging economies. So for a bank like ours, it's not an easy thing to sign up to a net zero by before 2050 commitment. But it's a must-do, obviously, clearly for all of us. We know actually that we're serving customers and markets that are going to be on the front end of the transition, not because of this, just because of the speed they have to decarbonise, but because of the development journey ahead for them as well, and the energy security and energy access journey ahead for them. In terms of the net zero financed emissions, I mean, as a bank, it's very different. I used to be in a professional services company, and if you think about it, then if I think about our scope 3, right? Now I'm in a bank. I used to think airline emissions was hard. Now I'm in the bank. That's the relatively easy bit. It's the financed emissions that count, which is basically everything on balance sheet and off balance sheet. And there's an even more kind of indirect, our ability essentially to move that portfolio of financed emissions. We have to engage heavily with our clients. We have to partner with them on a transition journey. We are actually moving, and this is a fundamental shift. I don't think it's quite yet recognized how fundamental the commitment made yesterday with 130 trillion of assets under management in this financial services system, the banks, the asset managers, the asset owners, the insurers, and the financial service providers, including the stock exchanges. But for a bank to sign up to that, I'll just give one example. We have now committed, and we did this already a year before with our climate resolution, our own climate strategy, but we have committed to release a transition plan next year to show how we're going to do that. We've committed to release at the start of next year short-term targets. So this is the most important thing. Net zero by 2050 sounds a long way, but actually implementation means we're going to have to release short-term targets next 5 years, next 10 years, sector by sector, in terms of how we push those portfolio emissions down. So in January, February, we'll be releasing oil and gas and power utilities, the rest of the sectors probably by the year after. And that's a huge exercise. And what that then means, that sounds like some analytics, a target. No, that means translating that into business unit level and client account specific plans, right? Working with our bankers on the front line to say, how does this relationship need to change going forward across the oil and gas segment, across the power and utilities, etc. So we are asking from here on in, every single year, we're going to be asking clients for their client transition plans. We're going to be engaging. We're going to have to do verification on, are they robust enough, not just with the commitments, but in terms of how they're laying out their corporate growth strategy, in terms of how they're laying out their CAPEX spend. Is that in line with the transition that we need? How are they investing in the innovation and the technologies they need to get to net zero before 2050? So it's a massive shift in terms of risk, in terms of integrating climate into our investment decisions, in terms of the culture of the bank, in terms of the big investment in capability and people we now need to work alongside the bankers to validate this. But, I'm a climate scientist actually by heart, and this is probably one of the things that's how I train, but this shift yesterday is probably the thing that makes me the most optimistic about our ability to get there now, because we now have all of these trillions in the finance system that have committed to shift that portfolio of assets under management. I'll just finish off by saying that the two kind of core parts of our net zero commitment as it stands is, working in partnership with our clients to get that transition around the financed emissions portfolio, but also unlocking 1 trillion of finance before 2050, before 2030, so over the next 8 years, so scaling from the billions to the trillion, to finance that transition, both in terms of partnership with our clients, new products, but financing, project finance for, new hydrogen facilities, whatever it might be, investing in climate tech, investing in deep decarbonisation technologies more broadly. So, exciting, big and important journey ahead for us.
Perfect. Thanks, Celine. And picking up on your point there that everybody needs to be in it together, including the stock exchanges. And Julia, if I might come to you, stock exchanges can play that pivotal role of architecting capital markets, working between financial services and the corporates. Can you maybe share with the audience some of the steps that the London Stock Exchange in particular are taking?
Morning, everybody. Thank you for having me as well. It's a delight to be here and to listen to this conversation, actually, as well. I think the first thing I'd say is stock exchanges have existed for hundreds of years to bring together those who have capital with those who need capital in service of an objective. I can't think of a more important objective right now than our transition to net zero. And therefore, actually, how we architect the way stock markets work, capital markets work in general, and all capital flows, and that's the important thing, is a critical part of how we're thinking. I think about it through several lenses. I think about it through the lens of intent, lens of information, lens of capability, the lens of inclusivity, all to have an impact. And we are looking at what we do through each one of those things. So the first piece is, what is the intent? Now, the combination of 47, I think, % of the FTSE 100 has committed to the race to zero. Now we need to get to 100% of that, but actually the intent established yesterday in terms of the requirement to disclose plans is part of that piece as well. We need to lead by example as an organisation, but we also need to convene others to sign up to that. In terms of the information, it's absolutely critical that people know what they can use and they can gather the data and have the capability to track it and understand it. But that's where we also need nuanced conversations. So I have talked about this is one of the greatest stewardship challenges of our lifetime. But not all money is actively managed. And so it's also one of the greatest indexation challenges of our lifetime. And we run FTSE Russell. You've got other businesses that do similar things. And actually, we have an absolute duty to think about that very carefully and to frame it very carefully. This cannot be constructed as a binary debate. And I'll come back to why. The capability piece is enormous in terms of the investments we're making in building capability across the market, both in providing information, and we're giving issuers climate governance scores so that they can understand how investors would understand how they're perceived and understand them at the moment. But we've also made investments into the London School of Economics Grantham Institute to enable the Transition Pathway Initiative to go from covering 400 companies to 10,000 companies. And all of that information will be made free and available, so that it's basically to maximise the pace at which people can understand the nature of the impact that their investments have. The inclusivity piece is that we don't get to net zero and stay there without the entirety of the market moving and all capital flows moving. That's why we're talking about 130 trillion. One of the challenges, and I'm guilty of it myself, I was involved in setting up some of the first green bond businesses in the City of London, is we've segmented all of these capital flows. So most of the way that green finance has happened is in segments. We have sustainable bond segments. We have a green economy mark. Fundamentally, we need to be able to understand how all activity across our market impacts our climate and actually impacts human beings and the way they live in general. And that is a complete reorienting of how we think about value. It's a complete reorienting of the skill sets that we need. And it is a shift that we are seeking to drive in the way we think about it. So one of the first things I did when I arrived, and had to apologise to my colleagues for doing so, was say, it is absolutely brilliant that you've built these world-class segments. I now want you to spend the next 5 years deconstructing them, because it needs to be how everything we do in the market functions. But the other piece is we have to have an open conversation about the capability sets we need to kind of merge together. And I think you're a classic example of it. I'm a climate scientist working in a bank now. But when I was running market regulation at the FCA, I was partially responsible for bringing TCFD in as mandatory for premium listed companies. I did apologise to Noel about that last week. One of the questions I asked myself is, as a regulator, you've got to regulate these disclosures. Now, I have a whole lot of brilliant corporate finance geeks working for me who are brilliant at poring over balance sheets and understanding value as we have classically understood it. But do I now need to hire a whole lot of climate scientists and teach them to be corporate finance geeks, or do I need to take my corporate finance geeks and teach them to be climate scientists? Yes. This is a capability shift we need to be really open about the need to develop. And it is where physics and finance meet. It's where biology and finance meet. It's where sociology and finance meet. It's all of those things. And we have to get much better at saying that we need interdisciplinary capabilities. One of my biggest pleas is universities need to start retooling and reframing the way they train people to embed that in. We've had finance and French for years. can we please have finance and physics now?
Very good.
So that we're focused on all those pieces of the puzzle, but it is in service of getting to a point where we can thoroughly price in the externalities of the way companies do business into the way they're valued.
Very good. And maybe, Richard, to build on some of the points that maybe Celine and Julia have just mentioned, it's a complex topic. It's vast sums of money. Understanding is going to be critical, as Julia was mentioning. And in order to drive that understanding, we need data. We need accurate data. We need timely data. We need trusted data. Given the organisation that you're from, how do you see that playing out? And how do you see last night's announcement of the consolidation of the standard setters in helping, simplify and ease understanding?
Yeah, so thank you for inviting me here. It's a wonderful space. Great to be here today. At S&P Global, data is our bread and butter, basically. We need data to make decisions about credit ratings. We need data to build better indices. We serve data over our platforms to over 300,000 users, and data sits at the heart of the work that we do within our Platts division on the energy sector. So we have 4 kind of big intersections with capital markets that all require a lot of data. I run a part of S&P Global called Sustainable One. We set this up earlier this year. It's about 500 people. Sits at the heart of the company, and our job is to get sustainability data and to use that in a way that enables better decision making, both internally within S&P Global. So some of my clients are the 1,600 credit rating analysts that we have, as well as obviously externally. The challenge with data is not that really we have quite a lot of data, and many would argue we have enough data to get going with decision making. Part of the problem we have is really with data and definitions. We have to be very clear about how we define sustainability, how we define transition, how we define a route to net zero. Because if we're not clear, we're going to have a very fragmented world that is all saying it's going in the right direction. Yeah. But are we actually going to see real world action on the ground? When we make those investment decisions, we make capital allocation decisions within companies. How do we track whether we're making progress? So at S&P Global, we're really all about accelerating progress in markets. So we want to make sure that when we're integrating environmental, social, and governance considerations into our credit ratings, we're doing so with the greatest level of rigor, and that we also know what the goal is. And I think that's where we need a lot of clarity. Within the context of climate, we have clear goals. We have 2050 ambitions. I loved your comments about actually needing more near-term lens on a 2050 goal, because I think we have the destination plotted, but we don't necessarily know what the route map is. And I think actually there is no, we now have the scale and level of commitment to make that, the first steps on that journey, but if we all go in different directions, it's not going to be that helpful. So I think the IFRS work on setting up the ISSB, International Sustainability Standards Board, is a fantastic next step, because I think that really we do need very clear accounting standards. And starting with climate was a good place to start, and I really do think that having clear accounting standards that are adopted by securities regulators across the world in a consistent way will really make it a level playing field. We'll know how to measure progress. That, coupled with, I would say, what is another thing that is required, which is harmonization of how we define green transition, would be a great step forward for the world. And so at the moment we have 20+ taxonomies being developed. Europe has its own green taxonomy. This is a definition of what is green. We need harmonization between those taxonomies, because global investors, global banks, that 130 trillion, need to know that when they're investing or financing a transition, that they're not going to actually get criticized for financing the wrong thing, and that actually we're all going in the right direction. So we really welcome the announcement.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, you're such an important enabler in the space, both with data as well as comparability. So thank you for these comments. And I think we'll get back to what you said, also the comparison of what's said and what's done in just a minute, because our next question is really about that. And this COP is definitely the COP that moves from commitment to action. We know that the trust in that we're really changing is unfortunately still low. So at Accenture, we believe in the power of technology and human ingenuity. So I'd love to also see how you're using technology in order to measure and track some of the progress on the agenda. Sonia, if I might kick this to you first.
Yes, no, thank you. And I think data is absolutely key. Measurement, so we provide that transparency in terms of, are we really delivering the actions to align with the commitments that we made? And I use this phrase, as you said, Richard, we're not short of data in the world. And really what it's about is having the least amount of the most important data that provides that insight that says, are we tracking? How do we learn from it? How do we course correct where we need to? And so I really look at it at 3 levels. At the first level, and if I look at it just through the carbon lens, well, really, we've got the broader sustainability agenda, but just through the carbon lens, at corporate level, it's absolutely about tracking progress against a number of targets, scope 1, 2, and 3. And it's saying, how are we doing? So we have science-based targets, targeted at 1.5, so it's a 65% reduction in terms of emissions in our operations by 2030. We also have a goal for a 50% reduction of our product-related emissions, so looking more at the scope 3 area. And we report this. We report this for our operational emissions. We report it on a monthly basis. And the days of spreadsheets are gone, I'm happy to say. And technology has been absolutely key in that to help aggregate the information, but importantly to analyze it, to say, what is it telling us in terms of performance? I think the second level to look at, if we're really interested in driving action, is getting to the bit where it moves from the corporate to the real action, which is, for example, at a manufacturing site. So how are we using, for example, we have one of our biggest sites in Poland, in Nowy Dwór. And how do we use smart metering? How do we use analytics to really understand how our energy and water consumption is tracking against operational changes? And how do we drive that approach to really reduce our footprint quite substantially? And our Nowy Dwór site is one of our best performing sites because of the use of technology. And then the third level is looking at it across our supply chain where it gets really hard. That complexity is real, but we have to look at the meaningful actions we can take. And this is where palm oil, as you can imagine, is an issue for us. And we have commitments in terms of RSPO certification, which is great, but that will not stop deforestation on its own, frankly. So we've partnered with Earthworm to look at what actions we can take on the ground with the palm oil supply chain that we have, to work with farmers, to look at both the social, to look at human rights, as well as the environmental footprint to see what we can do. But we've complemented it with satellite monitoring. Satellite monitoring to really look at the areas that we source from to say, what is the status of deforestation and where do we need to have targeted action? So I think when we look at technology, we need to kind of be really selective about how we use it, to use the right data in the right way to drive action. And for us, it's also about communicating externally to our investors, to have that transparency in terms of where are we doing well, but also where do we need to do more, frankly. And also for our internal folks, it's absolutely key to inspire them to act as well in terms of their day job. And it's not just about the data. It's about the qualitative information to bring it to life. The stories about Nowy Dwór, about what we're doing elsewhere that really also catalyzes and drives the change that we want to see.
Yeah, I think it's so important, and we'll get to exactly that inspiring and organizational aspect in our next round for sure. I think, Marcelo, if you want to build immediately, since the consumer goods perspective.
Sure, Nina, and yeah, great ideas here, and I totally agree that we should connect different expertise and different backgrounds. So connecting finance to physics to sociology probably is the ESG expertises that should come together, and technology should enable that to become visible and transparent and to see. And I remember I went to an exhibition here in London 2 years ago from an Icelandic artist that he mentioned an alphabet for the 21st century. And on D, he said, what do we do with all this data? Because there is a lot of data and it must be used to achieve goals that are meaningful to your organization, but also to society as a whole. What we tried to do in Nature & Co was when we assembled the 4 companies, we specifically set the 3 main pillars, so one for environment and the Amazon, which is a big issue for us, the whole human rights aspect, so defending human rights and reflecting the demographics and the fabrics of the societies where we operate and enabling the communities to restore and tracking the data and technology to allow them to do so, and circularity, which is super important for consumer goods industry, and the whole discussion on how to get different materials and data is super important on this angle as well. Just want to highlight two specific points that I think are new to the discussion at one end, which is sometimes we have trouble with public data as well, to get clarity on what's going on. And for the Amazon, for instance, we aligned with scientists and with different institutions to have transparency on deforestation and regeneration, and we launched a public website tracking what's going on so we can have the public discussion with other companies bringing others to regenerate, to try to bring new perspectives and models of development with agroforestry solutions that can be visible and that can be achievable by larger numbers. And I think, finally, there is the holy grail on all those metrics and all those standards. And we were discussing that yesterday. There was this big announcement on finally some conversion, because this is so necessary. I mean, we've been reporting on GRI since 2000. We have the impact assessment with 126 criteria. So it's super important for us to really get the data connected and technology to agree on what you have in different geographies and different companies. We're getting there. I think we are moving in the right direction.
Yeah, okay. And I think this is exactly, as you mentioned, it's to some extent all of these measurements are an ESG use case for some type of internal measurement process. And Celine will also talk a little bit through the many different use cases that they see. So thank you so much. I think, Ben, for you, the story is a little bit different, but also very interesting. So if you'd...
Yeah, I mean, I'll approach this in a different way. So, of course, we've published our pathway to net zero. We've made some firm external commitments. Internally, we're working hard to meet those. So, for example, our facility in Bristol, we think will be the first large industrial facility in the world to be net zero by the end of next year, anywhere in the world. So we're doing all of that. But I think the perspective it might be interesting to bring is a different one in terms of our customers and our business model and how we work. And so we'll look at it in a slightly different way. The first thing I'd like to highlight is that all of our power solutions, always through time, have been about minimizing energy consumption. So we feel we're on the right side of the trend. And so we've always been striving for that. And to do that costs billions a year in something like a gas turbine for the aerospace industry. In the UK, for example, for decades now, we've been the #1 filer of patents every single year in the UK. So we're the biggest technology company in the UK in terms of R&D spend and patents. And so, crucially, when we do that, we make contractual commitments to our customers for better outcomes. So that's the first building block. The second building block is that we pioneered power as a service in the world 25 years ago. So we pioneered power as a service. So we actually own those outcomes. So what we've effectively done is we've actually internalized, if you like, the circular economy for power from our customers. We've internalized it and taken it over. So we own the circular economy for power for our customers. And then the third element is that we also pioneered engine health monitoring and big data to go alongside that. We have to de-risk the fact that we own those outcomes. So we actually use that to optimize those outcomes for our customers. So it's a very different type of situation. So we're investing, and so in that first box, and so our latest engine, the UltraFan, will be 25% more efficient than the Trent equivalent, which is the current engine. When it comes to power as a service, if you're travelling on a train in the UK, we own the power outcomes. It's not Hitachi or one of the train manufacturers. We take on that whole power through its life and manage it through its life and make it available to the customer. Then on that third bucket, when it comes to monitoring, we can actually tell an airline, for example, Pilot X, the way Pilot X takes off in Rio de Janeiro, is actually burning too much fuel. You can actually change the way our customers behave in terms of their ecosystems and what they do. And so we've been measuring complex ecosystem outcomes for decades now. And the trick for us, the answer to us essentially, is to use that data to make sustainable power outcomes much more visible for stakeholders. Because it's incredibly complicated. And the more we can make those outcomes visible, the more we can drive change and get more sustainable solutions.
And can you speak a bit to the digital twin concept just in that
Sure,
phase?
yeah. I mean, we have all of our products are obviously manufactured as a digital twin. So we have the product twin. We have the production twin, that essentially all of our production systems are optimized digitally before they actually start manufacturing physically. And then most importantly, and the most complex element, is the performance twin, where we have to try and understand that huge ecosystem. So we've recreated that twin, and we're now trying to work to optimize that entire system and make it work. So we're not trying to actually minimize the data we have. The more data we can get and the more data we can process, we can actually get more optimal outcomes. So we really live in that digital world, and we deal with colossal amounts of data. I think people might be quite surprised. The financial services industry does, but we rent the national supercomputing infrastructure to just crank some of our models and simulations to get better outcomes.
Yeah, and I think we have really impressive stories, but I'll kick it over to you for our financial services participants.
Just building on your comment, Ben, right, where you say you have the ability to harness the data to get real insights right down to pilot behaviour, if you like. Maybe coming to you, Richard, on this side, if we have that ability that we can really interpret data, we can really build insights, do you believe that there still is a credibility gap between what companies are reporting and perhaps what they're doing?
Yeah, I think there's sort of three issues, really. So I think that we have somewhat unintentional greenwashing. We have data gaps, and then we have data holes. And I'm being slightly controversial. I think the somewhat unintentional greenwashing is really because we have a lot of companies making commitments, making changes in practice as well. But in terms of how that is reported, it's actually quite hard to then assimilate what is being reported in a consistent format, because we have lacked international accounting standards on this. And so for us at S&P last year, we had to standardize over 2,200 climate disclosures by 1,700 companies. So there's a lot of work required in actually standardizing just what is disclosed. And I think once we get more standardization and reporting, the real efforts of companies will shine through, certainly the largest companies. That brings me to the data gaps. We actually also have significant areas where we need greater clarity around what a standard is. The IFRS has made a start, but really the securities regulators are going to need to embed the definitions of precisely what needs to be reported and how we define transition. And then data holes, really, we have vast swathes of the economy that still doesn't report anything. And so the challenge that we have when we look across this landscape is we have the top largest companies in the world, like the ones represented here, reporting really well. But then disclosure sort of falls off a cliff when you get to, beyond about 5,000 companies. And if we think about what is actually happening right now, companies are divesting assets that are fossil fuel intensive right now. And that has been picked up by private equity in particular. And that is a bit of an issue. If you don't have a whole system perspective, to your point earlier, then we have a problem. So we need to make sure that we sort of are aware of these data gaps and data holes, and that we're aware of where we need to fill some of this. And then we have areas which are really just new and being explored, but are critically important as well, like biodiversity risk and nature risk. We need to connect biodiversity with climate action, because we need to make sure that whilst we drive towards net zero, we are net positive from a landscape and nature perspective as well.
No, excellent. I love the way you've summarised into data gaps and data holes. I noticed you looking at Julia as well in terms of the risk, if you like, if we're not careful of capital being allocated into private areas, where it might even be more obtuse to find out what's going on. What's your perspective on that?
Well, I've been very public that I understand, look, I was a securities regulator, so I understand entirely why securities regulators regulate the thing they have responsibility for. But fundamentally, I've been very public about saying that there is nothing innate about being a public company or a private company that has an impact on the planet.
Yeah.
You know, that's not a marker of how you influence climate. And therefore, we need to be thinking about this as an entire economy shift. And one of the challenges of the expectations of yesterday, which I wholeheartedly welcome, is that there is the potential for that gap, which is why I was nodding as vigorously as I was. I hope that to some degree the responsibilities that are going to be on asset owners and asset managers, who also have large private portfolios and therefore are going to need that data, will help to a degree, but it may not help perfectly. And I think we should tackle and be open about that conversation now, rather than chasing along and trying to fix it in 2 or 3 years' time. Because we have to move the entirety of the economy. We've been talking about this, the first conversations in financial services around this were around trapped assets. But the last thing we want to do when we've got this coalescence of focus on fixing this problem is engineer in the very trap that we were worried about. Yeah. And I think we just have to be really overt about that.
Yeah. And since we're still staying on the topic of technology, I think and challenges, I think also with it. Celine, we're working at HSBC together, Accenture and HSBC are working together on the ESG data engine, data utility, to capture so many of the ESG data use cases. So I think we have a whole video also for the audience right after our panel that will tackle that in its entirety. So stay tuned for that. But I'd love to also hear from you maybe a little bit on these broader use cases, but also the challenges that you now see as you are moving on your net zero agenda, and how you solve for them.
Will do. I'll focus on the data side just to keep it on point for now, because there's lots bigger challenges in terms of how we get there as well, including capability, which we spoke about before. I think I won't go too detailed on the ESG data utility because we've got that video, but I think what I would like to come back to is this whole data gap, data hole. I would actually call it, from our side, a data chasm, right? Because if you think actually about who we bank and then who we need to have a grip over from a financed emissions portfolio perspective, not just private, where there's much less data, there's been less pressure on private to kind of do that analysis to begin with, let alone report. But also much smaller players, right? Smaller actors. In global banking might be fine because we have the large institutional and corporate clients. As we work our way through corporate banking and into retail, you know, the data is much less there and hopefully will improve. And then obviously we also have the jurisdictional changes. So in emerging economies, there's much more of a data issue that, you know, it will take time. The good news, though, is that there is now going to be a ripple effect because we now have to ask our clients for that information, right? Because now, as I explained, the new modality, the new shift that's happening is we have to ask for client transition plans. We have to feel comfortable in ourselves. They're going to have to start preparing that for us. So it's almost like our asking for that disclosure as a lever now should hopefully help. But there will be a time lag. There will be a period where we have to leave actors, you know, give actors enough time to be able to kind of get that capability build. I think the other side, I mean, you mentioned use cases, but, you know, we're having to move very quickly in this space because there's many different demands. So one, as a bank, we need to have a full grip on our own risk exposure, right, where we stand kind of financially. So we need to have the data from a risk and a financial management perspective. Our bankers on the front line need to have the data to engage with our clients from an advisory perspective on where they are from a transition and ESG perspective, but also in terms of structuring new products. So as we need to structure the new transition bond, what are the KPIs? We need the client data for the KPIs. And then in addition to that, we obviously need data to engage with our stakeholders, whether it's investors or whether it's broader stakeholders and government stakeholders. So there's those different kind of areas, but then we have every single month, every single year, there's then a new requirement as well, right? So we have the Bank of England stress testing has been a huge effort for us this year. In parallel this year, we've been doing all of the kind of financed emissions analysis, right? So 2 huge modelling exercises at once. We've got a multitude of other central banks that are going to be asking for stress testing and are shortly going to be, and they might have slightly different requirements and asks in terms of how they want us to do that, right? We have TCFD, we have, you know, hopefully IFRS will come in and help simplify and make that more effective over time. So there are all of these live use cases, and what we need to do, and this is what we're working with Accenture on, is just centralizing that into one core data utility that will then enable us to kind of create layers on, so we can have the data we need in the risk function and in the finance functions, but also the data we need to go out and service clients as well and build new products with them and advise them. So it's a big effort, but I think for me, a really important thing also is, as you know, what's the ask from government? Well, what the UK government did the other day in terms of asking for client transition plans, if we could have that across the board, that would be a huge help going forward, because otherwise the lever's just coming from the finance sector at the moment.
Yeah, no, completely. And as you say, it's big, it's complex, and it's an ever-moving feast. Each of you, to a certain extent, have talked about understanding and capability enhancement. Maybe, Sonia, if I get you to kick us off, what are some of the programs or some of the initiatives that your organisation are undertaking to increase capability and understanding, and to use that ESG data mindset to actually drive performance? Because I've noticed in all of your responses, you said it's not just about financials and it's not just about sustainability, it's about them together. Can you elaborate on maybe what Reckitt's are doing?
Yes, very, very happy to. And I'm actually going to split it into two areas, if I may, which is one is those areas where we have data and it's easier to measure. And actually there's a whole area when we're talking about data gaps that are really hard to measure as well. And actually our approach has to be very different in those two spaces. So if I look at the first one, what we've really thought about it from a data perspective and how we use it to drive performance is there's the easy to do stuff. And I hate to say it, carbon, believe it or not, is the easy to do stuff. Reporting on carbon emissions, we've had protocols. It's probably the best defined across the sustainability agenda. We've been doing this for years, right, Marcelo? It's not new. So can we measure and report? Absolutely, we can. But we also recognize that we really wanted data to drive our innovation pipeline, and we wanted much more sustainable innovation. So probably one of my most favorite metrics that we have in the business is we report externally on the percentage of our net revenue that comes from more sustainable products. And that definition, because definition is key, about more sustainable, looks at carbon, water, across the life cycle. It looks at plastics, packaging, and our ingredients, so chemistry, the stuff that really makes up what more sustainable looks like. And every single innovation in our pipeline has to measure it, report it, and say, is it more or less sustainable than the closest product that we have in our portfolio? And that has driven innovation like a juggernaut. It is a key metric for our marketing community. It's a key metric for our R&D community. It's in people's objectives to really say, actually, how are we doing? And we make business decisions based on it. It is one of the metrics that's reviewed every time any innovation gets reviewed and cleared for approval. And I think that's just one example of where we've said, actually, carbon, yes, all these different aspects, but actually, a lot of the time in sustainability is about trade-offs. You have more natural products, your water footprint goes up. So the good news is when you've got something like plastics and packaging, the more recycled content you have, your carbon goes down. Happy days. But it's not always that straightforward. So having this one metric, which we report externally, we also have internal metrics, which are higher. The target we have currently is that 50% of our net revenue will come from more sustainable products by 2030. The figure that we had in 2020 was 30%. And our internal metrics are higher than that in terms of our pipeline metrics to help achieve that. But that's been really powerful for us to look at a business issue that we want to tackle, a business need in terms of people looking for more innovation, and say, okay, how do we orient metrics towards that? The second category of the hard to do is when we're talking about biodiversity and nature-based solutions. Now, the methodologies for how we report that and measure it are evolving. So a lot of companies have come out with targets around nature, and we didn't want to do that. We came out with our sustainability ambitions earlier this year, and we very deliberately didn't. We wanted to do our homework. So we hung back. We worked with we worked with Oxford University, it's got a very long title, Nature-Based Insetting Solutions team. And we looked at how could we measure our impact on ecosystems for our key supply chains across palm oil, latex, and selected fragrances like orange. And what that meant is we're using a science-based, data-driven approach to really first understand our footprint, and then second, define the right nature-based solutions that address biodiversity, not just by minimizing loss, but by bending the curve of biodiversity loss. So we're looking at regenerative approaches, but we're also looking at climate-based solutions. So what are the solutions that target biodiversity, climate, and people? Because a huge part of what we do is about sustainable livelihoods across our supply chains. And unless we look at this as a joined-up issue, we're not going to drive that action. So I think when we think about that data-driven decision-making, I think it's important to look at the metrics and be a bit of innovative in terms of the outcomes that you want to drive. Yeah. But secondly, to use the science and evolve with it as it will change. With biodiversity, we've got SBTN, but it's not there yet. TNFD will come, but it's not there yet. So in the interim, let's use science to build our understanding rather than come up with knee-jerk solutions that actually don't fix the problems in a joint-up, integrated way.
No, it's an excellent point. Like as momentous as it was to have an announcement on disclosures and reporting, actually trying to drive a business premium from the insights is even more important, really. Marcelo, can you maybe elaborate on some of the points that you thought were similar, or how Natura is handling things a bit differently?
Sure. Sonia raised amazing points and super important, and I think it's making that connection between what drives business innovation, the agenda, the global agenda, and how we report that. It's really what it's all about, and the center of our discussion as well nowadays. I'm part of the TNFD initiative, so it's starting. I think it's super important. For us, it's key. So TNFD stands for the connection between nature and risk. So precisely this dialogue in a more institutionalized framework. And it's, for us, science-based targets for biodiversity, TNFD, are the moment for us to really change the agenda towards something that can be regenerative. Because the whole carbon agenda, as you said, it's an important one, it's fundamental, but it's something that must evolve. It's only the moment where we are, but there is a film to build. I think for Natura, it all started really in a similar moment as we are having now in Glasgow. Back in 1992, we had the conference for the UN, the Earth Conference in Rio. And that's when Natura founders said, listen, what if we use the Brazilian biodiversity inside the jars and we do something with the communities? That's when it all started. And then, but it took a lot of time and to learn how to operate in a different model that was super innovative. So using the cycles of nature, respecting that the commercial agenda is not the same as the nature agenda. So there is really a concern between not only the environment, but how you deal with communities, how you not create a Dutch disease with communities. And that created target for us as well. So how many bioingredients we operate, we have that in our scorecard, how many communities and how much benefits we share with them under the Nagoya Protocol. So those are metrics that I think for the future will be more and more important. One of them that I think for us, it's something that really drives the agenda in Natura is how much of the Amazon are we protecting by our practices? Nowadays, it was last year 1.8 million hectares. This year, 2 million. We have the aim to protect 3 million by 2030. Not enough. That because it's half of the size of Holland. The Amazon is gigantic. We must unite and be connected with others. That's why collective initiatives like this are so, so important. And just to finalize, I think there is also how we connect those main targets for the organization as a whole with different industries and different sectors. What we saw by creating a group that now comprises brands like Aesop and The Body Shop is that you can replicate the model in other regions. So Aesop is doing the same in Western Australia. The Body Shop has fair trade with 15 different communities, and that can become a target for the whole group. So I think connecting initiatives like this is what's really driving innovation in the sector and promoting the goals that we all want to achieve.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like I read a statistic that about 50% of the world's population will live in a water-stressed area by 2025. So if that's a fundamental part of your business and you're not factoring that into your business plans, you've got a huge blind spot there. Ben, maybe coming to you on this topic of, how you build capability to understand non-traditional metrics and measures. Maybe share some of the examples that Rolls-Royce are undertaking.
Yeah. So we're built kind of as kind of engineers upwards at Rolls, and we're kind of innovation machine. And our people love challenges, and the bigger the challenges, the better. So it's really about how do we kind of harness that for the biggest impact we can have around the world. So my general approach is is kind of consists of three things. So it's a general kind of approach I take. First thing I do is I set an ambitious kind of North Star for our people. The second thing I do is create a map or the architecture for how you get to that North Star, but deliberately it's reasonably vague. And then the third thing I do is try and encourage kind of expeditionary zeal in our people to then go and pursue use that architecture and that map to kind of pursue that North Star. When I look at that, when it comes to kind of ambitious North Star, we've got that as an organisation. Our vision is to lead the transition to net zero, so it doesn't get much bigger than that. When it comes to expeditionary zeal, our people have got bags of that. They're irrepressible. And so you can't stop them kind of innovating. And so, for example, in the last 3 years, we've set up 3 new sustainable power businesses. We're going to manufacture small modular reactors. This is kind of factory-built nuclear power. So we're doing that. We are powering urban air mobility. And so we're going to power kind of electric aircraft. And also, we've got a sustainable distributed power product now, which is modular and delivers sustainable net zero power, on site to factories, to infrastructure, etc. So we keep on creating things. We've also announced last week with the leader of Qatar and with Boris Johnson, we announced a new incubator and accelerator, which will be here in the UK, where the Qataris will invest billions in green tech startups. And we're sponsoring and leading that new centre here in the UK. So we've got lots and lots of endeavour. The challenge, in actual fact, is actually making that bite and making that real for us. And so I've got to take, if you like, great engineering outcomes and turn them into great customer outcomes, great business outcomes, and great society outcomes as well. So that's the challenge for us. And the architecture we're using for that is sustainable power as a service. So that means we have sustainable power solutions. We combine that with our power as a service concept. We combine that with big data and with AI. And we need to combine that with finance as well to create the entire package. Now, that's a really complicated thing for engineers to understand how do I fit into that? How do I fit into that business model? So my job is to make that real for people in terms of business outcomes and opportunities and customer products and real solutions, and then engineering that kind of flows into all of that. So that's the challenge that I face. And we're working with Accenture on that. So Accenture is our partner to try and really understand sustainable power as a service and the data we need to kind of get from these huge ecosystems to really generate real products and real services and real outcomes and financial performance for our shareholders, but good broader outcomes as well. So that's the challenge that we face, really is our core thrust. Of course, we've got lots of other stuff to do, but that's the biggest impact that Rolls-Royce can have on the planet, is driving that agenda. So that's really what I'm focused on.
Fantastic.
And I think you even spoke to symbol projects to kind of break it down for people or inspire people, right? I don't know whether you want to give one of these examples of these North Star symbol projects.
Well, I mean, so for example, if you look at something like urban air mobility, we could just provide the propulsion system for the aircraft, which we will do. And those propulsion systems, which are all electric, will be available soon. But on top of that, if you look at sustainable power as a service, what else can we do? Well, we can actually recharge the battery sustainably. There has to be a whole system of recharging those batteries, so we can actually produce the distributed power plants that do that. Then when it comes to the batteries, they're actually, after they've been 20% used, they're no good for that industry any longer. How do you actually reuse those batteries? We can take those batteries and reuse those in our distributed power products around the world. Then when it comes to all, that whole system and how do you actually optimize it, well, we do that with airlines all the time. So what I'm trying to do is pull all of these things together into really quite complex ecosystems and then understand them and make sense of them and creating the financial models to make them investable, the data to make it all work. That's a massive challenge. And so that's what we're working on with you guys at the moment.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I think we want to stay at this challenge of also how to bring the organization along. So Céline, if I look to you and also say, how are you mobilizing both maybe at the C-suite, but also really taking the broader organization along on some of these goals and commitments that you made to net zero. I think it's important to have that organizational aspect as well.
So I'd say our leadership is truly awake to actually the crisis that we're in right now. And I'm just coming back to Paris. We have 8 years, not Paris, to Glasgow. This is where we are, not Paris. We have 8 years, to, pretty much by the end of the year to 2030 to halve global greenhouse gas emissions. Massive, rapid transformation across every sector of the economy, across every single one of our business areas. The fastest, and we've been through in humankind, right? And I think that scale of that industrial transformation is something that we have to bear in mind is we have to now help all of our clients through that across all of our geographies, right? So we are asking them, as I said, show us your transformation plan. But we also have to do our own transformation plan. We have to transform the bank, the way we make decisions, the way we allocate capital, the way we think about our risk appetite, the way we build capability. And this is something our whole leadership gets. So the CEO actually newly created my role, the CSO, group CSO role, put it into his executive committee on purpose, because that's where this role needs to be now from that level. A lot of my peers are the CFO, the CEO, the CRO, the CEOs of our different parts of our kind of banking and asset management group. It's one of the 4 pillars of HSBC's strategy, the transition to net zero, which means that it's in the KPIs of everyone in the organization to show performance around that. And we're at the moment in the middle of a big operating model redesign because we recognize that sustainability can't sit as a function in the organization at the moment. We're doing a piece of work now to redo the whole operating model. So we're essentially embedding the capability across every single function, not just the sustainability function, and across every single business group. And we're going to set in place a new enabling environment from data to performance, through to how you make decision-making, all of that has to kind of come with it. So in other words, we're going through that big transformation process ourselves. The leadership team across the board absolutely get it. Our board, our non-execs absolutely get it. And there's a huge upskilling effort underway for us in terms of being able to do that because we need to upskill our bankers. I think we all spoke a number of years ago around digital upskilling and making that mainstreaming. Well, now it's net zero, ESG, more broadly, upskilling we're doing kind of at speed and scale. And also bringing in capability from outside in. I think I'm one of the early examples of that, but building a big capability in-house to be able to work hand in hand with our bankers to advise our clients on what that future looks like. Because we know what the sector transition pathways need to look like. We know some of the technologies that need to commercially scale and build out. But what we need to build in is the capability within our organizations to understand those new business models, to be able to back them and not kind of shy away from them because they look too risky or we don't understand them, and to understand the transitions that needed within the incumbent industries. So it's a big transformation, but the good news is our leadership is absolutely behind it.
Fantastic. And I think, Richard, you're also very much working to make data understandable. So can you just add a little bit on the training part also of what's needed?
Yeah. So within S&P Global, I suspect I had the biggest budget ask for next year, and I got it. And the reason why I got it was because I actually had to train each individual board member as to why sustainability was critically important for capital markets and for S&P Global to provide better intelligence to inform the kind of decisions that you were talking about. And so I think training is critical at all levels of the organization. We've trained all of the board individually. We've trained our shareholders as well, educated them as to why we're allocating such a large amount of capital into ensuring that we have the right information we can provide to markets. We've trained the 1,600 credit ratings analysts as to how to spot risks, both long-term and near-term, from a sustainability point of view. So environmental, social, and governance considerations affected 2,300 credit rating actions last year, and has led actually to us putting many of the oil and gas majors actually on negative outlook because of climate risks, because of the line of questioning that the credit analysts have been trained to pursue now. And so I think training is critical because it's not just a case of saying, here's ESG data, please understand what E, S, and G means. It's actually how do you integrate that into your day job? That's the critical part. It's translating the non-financial into financial. It's actually ensuring that we really do understand the system effects of some of the issues to do with climate and nature and ESG more broadly. Those are pretty complicated, and I think we do have a journey to travel on that. And if we're really to unlock, we have $130 trillion of capital that sits behind a dam right now. We need to let the floodgates loose. We can't really do that if people aren't trained to know how to allocate capital. And so that's something is critically important and we're focused on.
Perfect. Julia, anything you'd like to add briefly?
Well, I'm just going to pick up on the capability point, because I think it's been a theme that we've run all the way through. One of the challenges is really being able to recognise and call out all parts of the ecosystem that need to pivot. So this is a system-wide change where I'm trying to build parts of the market to reorient how it thinks about value, but I need all of the parts of the puzzle that make decisions in that chain to be able to have the capacity to do that. And I think we need to be really overt about that. It means audit and accounting needs to have the capability. It means the analyst community needs to retool how they think about value. And it also means we have to live with complexity and be comfortable with it. And my two biggest pleas in this entire debate are, can we stop constructing it as binary? I no longer listen to the people say, there's a trade-off. It's like, no, we have to go in this direction, and therefore we have to make the best way of doing it that we possibly can. And that is 2 years ago thinking, it's not today's thinking. So I think that the first thing we have to do is not make it binary. The final thing we have to do is to live comfortably with the complexity. It's very easy to say, you're doing it wrong because you don't have the answer. Well, actually, in certain cases, none of us have the answer yet. And therefore, we have to have a really grown-up conversation. It is about engagement. It is about proper discussion between parties. And it is about learning and us using our ecosystem of knowledge to kind of make sure that we adjust and adapt. That is really complicated in a world that tries to limit things to tweets, And so we have a duty, I think, to be really open about facilitating that complexity in that conversation and not making it a dirty word, but making it a really constructive part of the solution.
Love it. Perfect. Look, I could speak with you guys all day. Unfortunately, we are now out of time. So thank you very much for your insights. Thank you very much for sharing some real practical and pragmatic views, plus not belittling it. It is a tough task that lies ahead. So best of luck with it, and thank you for joining our panel. Nina.
Yeah. And I thank you for all of you to be here, for all of our audience to be here. For us, this session is now ending, but we have the opportunity to actually get together in person, which is great. For those who are virtual, we actually have the chance to show you a couple of videos that bring some of these things to life. As we said, for example, with HSBC on the data utility for ESG that we're building together. So I hope you'll stay around for this. And thank you for everyone for joining virtually and in person. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ed Broussard, CEO of Medano, Accenture's data-driven reinvention business. I'm delighted to be joined by Kate Platonova, Chief Data Officer of HSBC, and Charmaine Wong, Head of ESG Data. Kate, one of the things I love about HSBC's ESG approach is you really get data into the decision cycles of the business. Can you tell me a little bit how ESG data is important to your sustainability agenda?
To me and to HSBC, we believe that ESG and sustainability is fundamentally about data. Without good data, without understanding our own commitments, our supply chain, our customers, it's very difficult to measure if you're actually making progress or not. So great data at the right time, at the right place is key to us fulfilling our strategy.
And ESG data is notoriously complex and constantly evolving. Charmaine, can you tell us a little bit about how you're overcoming some of those data challenges?
Within HSBC, we've taken a really proactive approach to have a center to coordinate all ESG data requirements for the entire bank. What this means is that we can then coordinate, source, and also demystify some of the data in a central place so that everyone is speaking the same language. And then what we also do is build reusable data sets to then make data accessible to anyone. So the time to market for new requirements is quicker. And I think that HSBC has taken a really proactive, important stance in this piece to actually solve some of the complex challenges that we're seeing. We're also working with Accenture to develop agile pods to deal with the ever-changing requirements that are coming our way.
Brilliant. So bringing everything together and providing a single centralised place that you can act as a utility to the organisation seems core to your strategy. Kate, maybe you could explain why you've taken that approach.
Of course, Ed. So standardization is the name of the game here. These data sets that we see out in the market, there's a lack of consistent taxonomy, there's a lack of standards that everybody would agree on. So in HSBC, we're making sure that, as Charmaine says, we are all speaking the same language. In a way, we're future-proofing ourselves against regulations and different emerging requirements by having this group standard and kind of alignment of all the different data sets, both internal and external.
That makes a lot of sense. And I guess as we look around the ecosystem, I see a lot of big businesses like HSBC and Accenture partnering really to kind of solve societal ESG challenges. Can you talk a little bit around what's important to you about this partnership?
These partnerships are key to the future. So what we're seeing again in the macro level is that there must be a partnership between public and private sector. There must be a lot of partnerships built in the private sector to really get us to where we need to be as a planet, really as human beings. Where we started to look is, first of all, looking at partners that are also committed. So HSBC is incredibly committed to this agenda. We want to lead, we want to help our customers transition. So we need some partners that are equally interested in this topic and equally passionate. You also need to make sure that you're supplementing your weaknesses and playing to the strengths of your partner, and making sure that you're choosing the best in class for the specific area that you're trying to address. And the partnership is mutually beneficial. So it's very, very exciting times.
And Kate, you talked about data being at the core of the sustainability strategy and agenda. But what's the end game? Like, what impact can banks and big banks like HSBC really make on society and the planet?
First of all, we need to move from commitment to action. So that is where we are right now. With all the different commitments that companies are making, governments are making, it's really time to be measured, to follow through, to see that action manifesting itself in the real world. And what's exciting to me is HSBC is in an absolute prime position, not only as a very large institution to transition ourselves to net zero and be more sustainable, but to actually help our clients. We have clients that are in the industries that are desperately in need of that transition. So being able to fund it, being able to help them, to be with them on the journey is what makes me really excited. To help our suppliers, to work with them, and to make sure that together we get to the commitments that we need to achieve. We really better the world that we live in and save the planet.
Thank you. That's been so interesting to hear about what you're doing at HSBC, and I think really just demonstrates the impact a bank like HSBC can have, not just on their customers, but their supply chain and the wider planet.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm Elizabeth Moreno from Accenture, and I'm pleased to welcome Catherine Neebe, Chief Sustainability Officer and President, Duke Energy Foundation, who will be joining us for the first portion of this fireside chat. I'm also delighted to introduce Sasha Weintraub, Senior Vice President and Chief Commercial Officer of the Duke Energy Natural Gas Business Unit, who will also be joining us a bit later. We have so much to talk about with regard to how we've leveraged data and analytics to solve for key sustainability challenges, and I can't wait to dive in. Catherine, can you speak to some of the challenges the utilities industry faces with measuring and reporting progress towards sustainability goals?
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'd be happy to. We are having a moment right now in time for the world, for the United States, to really take a look at climate change and understand how we all respectively are taking action to mitigate against its impacts. And I think within the business community, we have a saying that what you measure is what matters. And this is really about creating and identifying the things that you need to be taking action on to drive change. And that sounds straightforward, but greenhouse gas emissions are not that straightforward. For the utility sector, specifically for power generation, we are very, very lucky because we do have access to continuous monitoring, highly sophisticated systems that really take a look at our emissions, monitor them, and enable us to report accurately what we're seeing and how we're reducing emissions overall. But outside of that, you have the lion's share of greenhouse gas emissions. And here things are much more complex. Here, emissions are calculated looking at things, taking assumptions into play, looking at estimates, at emissions factors, and really you get, I think, a good sense of what's actually happening in the world today, but you don't have an accurate picture of what's happening. And let me unpack that a little bit. What you're missing often is access to timely information. So what's happening on a given day and a given moment. You're also sometimes losing a locality. So think about deforestation, sustainable agriculture, or even the natural gas distribution. You sometimes lose the exactly where something is happening. And then the third thing that you lose is often access to which interventions are really effective at driving down emissions relative to some others. And this is kind of the holy grail. I've been working in sustainability for 20 years, and this is a huge unlock where I've been working with manufacturers and retailers and now Duke Energy to try and shift the conversation from how are we calculating this stuff and how are we reporting this stuff to what are the actions that we need to be taking today to actually drive down those emissions. And of course, a core part of that is thinking about how are you disclosing what you're finding, how are you driving down emissions. I think I'm a huge supporter in measurement because I think that drives action. I'm a huge supporter of transparency because I think that holds us accountable to deliver against our promises, but also helps to enhance trust. But whatever we can do to reduce the friction, to reduce the time, reduce the burden of trying to figure out and calculate what is actually happening, everything that we can do to reduce that, to shorten that, so that we can get, most importantly, to the actions, will be to the benefit of us and to the benefit of society.
And Catherine, how did Duke Energy decide to tackle this?
One of the coolest things that I get to say is that our climate strategy is our business strategy. And we have, for our electricity generation, a net zero by 2050 goal, and for our natural gas business, a net zero in methane emissions by 2030. We've been reporting on our progress and on our journey for 15 years. We've been included in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index for North America for 15 years, and we recently won an award for the quality of our disclosures, where I believe we're one of the top 10 companies in the United States and the number one in our sector for our disclosures. So what you're seeing here as we think about methane emissions detection and monitoring, this is just a good continuation of that historic work to understand climate change, to understand what our emissions are, and then to most importantly take action to reduce them. And I'm super excited about the partnership and the work that we have together with Accenture and Microsoft to really say, how do we just accelerate this even more? How do we bring this kind of technology forward so that everyone is really well positioned to take the action that is so necessary?
I love how you talk about setting the target and then measuring the progress toward it. Sasha, can you speak to some of the specific targets that are being set by the Natural Gas Business Unit at Duke?
Yes, Elizabeth, thank you. So at the Natural Gas Business Unit at Duke, we had 4 goals going into last year. We wanted to have happy and loyal customers. We wanted to be a great place to work for our employees. We wanted to operate with excellence, and we wanted to be a strong, growing business. But after our ESG Day in October of 2020, we added an environmental strategic priority, the net zero methane emissions by 2030. And that's the goal that really set into action all these impacts in order to allow us to achieve that goal. And we really work hard in order for us to be the first LDC to hit net zero using reportable emissions that allow us to be accountable and traceable with our path to net zero. So we're really excited to be working on that goal with Accenture and Microsoft.
Sasha, where did Duke Energy decide to start?
Well, we really started with, right away, how do you report on that goal? So as we take action, how do we know that we're getting towards our net zero goal? And what we realized is we really needed to work on the reporting, being able to find out exactly what is the greenhouse gas methane that we want to reduce. And that led us down the path of real-time methane emissions monitoring to allow us to then, in much quicker turnaround time, be able to understand what is it that we're measuring and how can we go fix it in the field right away. And that's where we are today in building a platform with Accenture and Microsoft that we're really excited about.
Well, it sounds like a huge undertaking. I'm glad Accenture, Avanade, and Microsoft could partner in support of Duke Energy's progress to net zero methane emissions by 2030. Catherine and Sasha, thank you both for joining us today. Sasha, you'll be joining us on our next panel, and I look forward to discussing our technology solution. So let's bring it back a few paces and talk about this specific solution. I've got Sasha Weintraub back here with me, and I'd like to introduce Mark Schuler, a managing director in Accenture's utilities practice, and Heather Lux, client executive with Microsoft. Hi, Mark and Heather.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us today. Let's get started on discussing more about the solution. Mark, I'd like to start with you. How can you hope to both solve the problem and measure success at the same time?
Well, Elizabeth, we knew as we got started and dug into the goal that Duke was trying to achieve, we'd have to build some technology, and that's what we set out to do. We needed to build technology that could ingest lots of data, make sense out of all of it, to measure baseline emissions off the gas distribution system, verify that leaks had been fixed, and show a net zero result. And we've built that with the emissions platform, and we're super excited with its potential.
Thanks, Mark. So now that you've developed that technology that measures the methane emissions from natural gas distribution systems, how can field technicians use the data successfully to identify and repair methane leaks? Heather, can you talk a little bit more about the cloud solution?
Yeah, sure. So much of what Mark just mentioned, assembling all of that data, we used Microsoft Dynamics 365 to ultimately put it in the hands of the field service agents so that they can prioritize and repair those leaks that much faster.
And Elizabeth, this new technology can detect trace levels of methane that current technology is unable to do. Duke Energy partnered with a company called Satellytics that provides the satellite imaging and insights into the methane on our system.
That's incredible. Mark, how does the platform handle such a high volume of data from a variety of sources?
Well, handling a large amount of data was clearly a big challenge we had to overcome, and cloud's a big part of that. So Accenture and Avanade, which is our joint venture with Microsoft, teamed together, and we are applying skills in data science, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, and analytics in general to help measure the leaks, measure the flow rates on the leaks, and get that information to the field that Heather referred to.
Mark, what do you think a key component of driving value for this measurement program is?
Well, the value clearly comes from finding the leaks, as Sasha said earlier. The insight-driven approach to work scheduling and work planning, the whole efficiency and effectiveness of the work crews is a big part of the value proposition. Through additional workflow and automation, we expect to see other benefits. But I'll also note that the actual measurement can help with reporting with regulatory agencies and kind of make that more frictionless, as well as more productive conversations with other third parties.
Yeah, and I would add to that the ability to include advanced analytics as part of the cloud solution, really in conjunction with machine learning, helps the solution overall get more intelligent over time.
And Sasha, how does this change measuring and monitoring in the industry as a whole?
Well, I think it changes everything. If you're a natural gas distribution company, you can now report your methane emissions in real time, near real time, versus having to rely upon a report that's put together on an annual basis using emission factors. So this allows us to be able to trace our journey in very accountable and transparent terms as we reduce our methane emissions.
That's really incredible. So before we wrap, can each of you give a quick vision on how you see this type of measurement being applied to other use cases outside of utilities? Heather, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. I will just start by saying that overall, this partnership, this collaboration has really been exemplary of Microsoft's mission, which is to empower others to achieve more. Through great work and great collaboration with our partners like Accenture and Avanade and industry leaders like Duke Energy, we were able to solve a very complex environmental problem through the use of great technology and great data.
And from my point of view, I'd say, although we're focused on the gas distribution company right now, I'm excited about looking at the long-haul pipes and the production companies and how we can apply the same technology to help really promote green natural gas.
And I'm excited about the other use cases that this technology will open up, everything from right-of-way inspection to, we received a phone call from a utility along the Gulf Coast after the hurricane that was looking to see if the satellite can detect methane before a repair crew went into the neighborhood that was damaged by the hurricane, they wanted to make sure that was safe for their field workers. So this technology will open up new use cases for utilities in ways that we just are beginning to think about.
It's really fantastic. I look forward to seeing the impact that we can make within utilities and also across these other industries. Thank you to each of you for being here today and for your contributions to this incredibly important topic.
Today, the Environment, Social, and Governance (ESG) score of an organization is impacting business outcomes. Banks want to focus on providing green loans. Capital market players wish to increase their green investments portfolio. Retailer and energy companies are keen to make their supply chain green, and the list goes on. Reliable ESG data is at the heart of the sustainability process, and this is exactly where organizations are struggling the most because ESG data coverage is low. This makes it hard to get a consistent picture. ESG ratings are incoherent. So, which company's ESG data should your clients believe? And ESG process is not transparent. Companies are not able to tell which ESG factors are having a positive or negative impact on their overall performance. With a vision to mitigate these challenges, the Center for Data and Insights at Accenture has developed AI-powered ESG 360. It helps gather and process ESG attributes from all types of external data, including leading guidelines, and then combines external data with our proprietary AI algorithms to present a harmonized view. AI-powered ESG 360 determines what attributes should be extracted, how data should be extracted, assessment report that clients will get. To date, AI-powered ESG 360 has extracted more than 400 attributes from leading guidelines that help us in assessing the sustainability of an organization. Our solution not only leverages the power of third-party ESG data with proprietary AI algorithms to extract relevant data and structure it, but it also improves data completeness and veracity of external data to enable sustainable performance assessment. As well, our solution uses extensive feature engineering and custom intelligence, like disclosure reliability and comprehensiveness risk score. This helps our clients have the right lens when looking at a disclosure report and taking green decisions.